and James Fisher were there too. And this is such a dense swamp that logging was stymied. They really were unable to get into the depths of the forest and the old growth. So in a way, it was protected because it was so difficult. It has slash pine, pine cypress, tupelo, gnarly highwoods, and then there are all these thorny bushes too, waist high saw palmettos. And here's a photo from Bradwell Bay. And Scott did travel there by himself, and he also went through the swamp. And I was worried for him at the time that he was doing that, as he was alone, and the temperature was not very warm. His feet, his toes were getting numb. And as you can see how dense this is, he had to be very careful about following the orange marks for the trail, which look, really pretty pale here, although this is a photo. So when he was almost above his waist in water, he realized, because he had to feel his way extremely carefully not to fall into a hole. He was bumping the cypress knees. There were thorns around. So he said, this is not a good idea, although he really wanted to get to the heart of the swamp. He was quite motivated and was disappointed that he couldn't do it, but he was kind of worried for himself. And then Fakahatchee, which is northwest of the Everglades, is a whole nother type of ecosystem. And Scott goes into explaining a bit about that, as wherever he goes, he has resource people, and he quotes them a lot and has learned tons from all the people that he networks with. And the man that he was with there, who was one of the supervisors of the Fakahatchee, was with him on this. So he had some good company, and as well as the man's wife, who was also involved and worked there. This shows you, this is Fakahatchee, and this shows you some of the logging that went on and how rampant, how devastating it would be to cut down so many of these trees and put in railroad tracks and so forth. Now, up in the north in Bradwell Bay, there are still railroad tracks there from their attempts to work in the forest as much as they could, although they couldn't get too deep. About the Fakahatchee, it has just a really unique ecosystem in that it has a canopy of the bald cypress, and then it has another mid layer of canopy, and this traps the air. There are layers of peat on the lowest level, and then the hydrology of the area, all of this combined to make kind of a very humid and hot place, and tropical. And it is considered like a northern Caribbean island. And here we have one orchid, the ghost orchid. There are 42 native orchids in the Fakahatchee, and 14 native bromeliads. And Scott did really enjoy, he talks a lot about plants, flowers, trees throughout the book. And he spent a lot of time talking about that in Fakahatchee. Now, it is what is considered a 3-foot deep river valley. And they joke about how this is the Grand Canyon of Florida, 3 feet deep. Here we have a snail kite, and I'm going to show a video. And to me, it does kind of really get to some of the wildness about Florida. I'll skip it, Nancy. Okay. Then we come to the Grand Canyon to talk about it. And I'm just wondering for any of you what your reaction is to the Grand Canyon. Roger Tory Peterson was so interested in what James Fisher would think because he had never seen it. And James Fisher was in such awe of it. He couldn't talk for 10 minutes, and which was unusual for him. And Roger Tory Peterson jokes about that. But he also cried for the unbelievable beauty of it. Now, Scott, on his trip, this is the first time that he's been to the Grand Canyon. And he is also astounded and astonished. However, he feels like it's a little underwhelming because he's seen so many pictures, he's heard so much about it, read about it, seen videos. And so he was a little underwhelmed, which I thought was interesting. When I saw it for the first time, I just I couldn't comprehend it. It almost looked like a picture to me. So I just didn't quite get it, because it's just so enormous and awesome. So both groups spent a fair amount of time talking about the condor and going through its demise and somewhat, of its recover. It has had some recovery. I found it interesting that this bird goes back to the Ice Age. There are fossils going back to the Pleistocene time, and Roger Tory Peterson and James call that chapter the Pleistocene Giants. And apparently, they survived. These condors on the West Coast were able to survive because they were able then to find food with marine animals, whereas other condors there were others throughout the eastern part of the country too, even into New York. Those condors did not survive. In 1937, there was effort and energy put into saying, yes, we need to help the condors. And so a refuge was planned. 1947, a wilderness was designated, and the Audubon Society hired Carl Coford to study the condors. And because there hadn't been a really, really close look at them and a study. And he found, and his report came out in 53, he estimated there were between 40 and 60 condors at the time. And he found out that they just have one egg every 2 years. And the chicks spend 6 months with their parents, and it takes 6 years to reach sexual maturity. So that's a long time for, and very few eggs to make to really have the population grow rapidly. Then in 1974, the Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge was designated. It was right next to Sepsi, and it added, I'm not sure how many acres, but it added a whole nother dimension, and a lot of research took place there. So there was a precipitous decline in the population when Coford found 40 to 60. That was considered very, very worrisome. But by 1982, there were only 21 left, and it was considered a crisis. there had been a lot of discussions about taking the birds into captivity and to breed them in captivity. And actually, Cofer was against it, as was the Audubon Society. And it was the San Diego Zoo that was pushing this, and it was quite an acrimonious fight over many years. But with that crisis of the decline, something had to be done. So they started bringing the condors into the San Diego and Los Angeles zoos for captive breeding. But they were down to only 9 in the wild in 1985. And then the yearly mortality was so high at 25%. Why did they decline so much? The biggest reason is that with lead in bullets and these condors feeding upon carcasses that had bullets, they were then quite susceptible to lead poisoning. So that's the largest cause. As human beings moved in and they changed the environment to ranching, cattle and horses, this took away from other food sources that the condors would have. With wolves and bears, there would be carcasses from other animals that they could feed upon, but without wolves and bears that were greatly diminished by ranching, they lost their good sources of carcasses. There could be other contaminated food. Some condors have drowned. They have a habit of eating almost anything, and they can die from that. They eat bottle caps and they eat string. When we were in Florida at the Everglades, we were warned that black vultures would eat the rubber that we used to have, around the windshields. And so they had covers that you could put over your car to keep the vultures away. Also, fire that has affected the condors. And then others, they don't know what happens to the condors. If they disappear for what reason, it's unknown. And here's where Sepsi Wilderness area is. Here we are at Los Angeles. Santa Barbara's over here. So that's the area where it's located. Now, the very last wild male was caught in 1987, and that is adult condor number 9. And this brought up the point of, well, now that it's been brought into captivity, is the condor in a way extinct? Because from then on, really, it's not truly a wild population. But there was success with the chicks, with chicks being hatched. The first chick in captivity, 1988. By 1992, there were 56 condors in rearing facilities. And also, 1992 was the first year that they were returned to the wild, considered sepsi. Now they're managed, really. There's a lot of management that goes on. They're captured regularly and their blood's taken and they're weighed and they're given exams. So sometimes food is provided for them. So they're kind of managed and they're not exactly wild. Interestingly, AC9 went back to the wild in 2002. 2003, by then, a wild bred chick hatched, and it was the first one since the 80s. In 2004, there were 246 condors, and I found some data. The last data that's available is from the end of 2024, when there are noted to be 369 condors that are in the wild, and about another 200, 197 are in captivity. So the population at the end of 2024 was 566. Improvement, but they're not really out of the woods. This picture shows the AC9 actually being captured. They used a net called a cannon net that shot out and over a large area, and it caught the condor as well as several other birds that look like crows. I'm not sure what they were, but that's how they caught him and put him in captivity. This is from eBird, and it is the range of where condors are today. Critically endangered. This does not show, however, that there is a population in the Northwest. It's a small one. It was 18 relatively recently, but and then just showing a few things from Alaska that seemed to be very important to Scott Weidensaul. Roger Tory Peterson and James Fisher, to them, it was a dream come true to go to Alaska. They were so excited about it. For Scott Weidensaul, it was very important too. And he had a couple of experiences that were where he was just completely taken with what he was seeing, was able to just be there in the moment. And he had an opportunity looking over on St. George Island, thousands of red-legged kittiwakes, thousands of least auklets, so many birds. It was stunning. He couldn't count them all. This red-faced cormorant and the red-legged kittiwake are endemic to this area. Also, there are lots of seals. They spent a lot of time looking and thinking about seals and how seals are managing. And then one of the flowers that he just was taken aback with was this chocolate lily, and he saw hundreds of them. This is in June. In June. So there's some great resources. There's so much about Mr. Weidensaul. He has a beautiful website himself, his homepage, and this is a video of the Wild America journey of Roger Tory Peterson and James Fisher. And then here's a link to all of our book discussions. And as of today, his newest book is being released today, April 21st, Return of the Oyster Catcher, Saving Birds to Save the Planet. A review I read of it said it's a pretty optimistic look at what's happening around the world with birds. So he's also going to be at the Biggest Week, Monday, May 11th, 4 to 5 p.m. And so if you're there, you can, and you're interested, you can check it out, and he will even sign a book for you. So that is the end, and we're finishing up our 6th season, and these are the books that we read, and they were good reads.